Happy New Year, everybody, and welcome back to Working Class Hollywood. Just a quick reminder before we start the show. If you haven't already, please go onto iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you're listening and subscribe, rate, and leave a review for the podcast. It is so helpful to the show. Also, if you know somebody you think might enjoy the episodes, just send them a link, give them a call, let them know it's out there. I'd really appreciate your help in growing this podcast in the new year. Thank you again to everyone that's listening, and let's get to the show. Welcome to Working Class Hollywood, conversations with people that make the movies, TV shows, and entertainment you love. If you're looking to break into or move up in the entertainment industry, or you're just a fan of content and want to hear about how it's made, this is the podcast for you. I'm your host, Jeremiah Smith.
They were basically saying, hey, instead of being some asshole writing in a Starbucks, trying to get your next job, why don't you come be an executive with our company? I had made a choice out of cowardice. I should have said, I'd be proud to be that asshole. That's the best way to eventually get where I want to be.
Today on the podcast, I sat down and chatted with Rashad Raisani. Rashad is a writer for television and specifically dramas. He worked on Burn Notice and White Collar, both on USA, and he has since spent time working for the studios in overall deals, both at NBC Universal and more recently at 20th Century Fox. Rashad is such an intelligent guy, and he gives some really priceless advice for anyone that's looking to start out in television or make that jump into the writer's room. He goes into great detail about how these shows come together, from being pitched to the writer's room to production and through post. It's really interesting. Rashad is also one of the nicest guys, I think, that's working in Hollywood today, and I really enjoyed sitting down with him and chatting. We had a lot of fun, so I think you are really going to enjoy my conversation with Rashad Raisani. Hi, Rashad.
Hey, how are you, Jeremiah?
Good, man. Thanks for coming over. I appreciate it.
My pleasure.
So I know Rashad. We met a long time ago. He is good friends with Joe Chandler, who is one of my oldest friends and was the first guest on this podcast. The first episode was with Joe. And you guys you worked together way back when, right?
That's right. We were assistants together.
That's right. So we'll hear that story. We'll hear how you and Joe know each other and how you both rose to fame and fortune in the writing business.
Yeah.
But where are you from?
Well, kind of from all over, because my dad was in the military. He was in the Air Force. And I was born in Shreveport, Louisiana, which is an Air Force base. And so I should back up even a little bit more just to give you a little context for who I am. But so my dad is a Pakistani immigrant, and he originally came to America just to do his medical residency. He's a psychiatrist. But while he was here, he met my mother, who was a nursing student at Rutgers, and they ended up getting married, and then they were living in New York City, and they were all set for him to go into private practice in Manhattan. And one day he came home and said, hey, today I enlisted in the United States Air Force. And he did it without telling her. And so, 9 months later, I was born in Shreveport, Louisiana. And then for the next 10 or 11 years, we were always moving from country to country, state to state. And so I didn't actually make it to America until I was 7 years old. And we ended up living in, all the deep South. So Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, and then lastly, Texas. And so the only connection I had to America, other than living on these American Air Force bases, was the Armed Forces Network, which was, beaming in The Cosby Show and Growing Pains and Family Ties to all these bases all over the world. And that's why I have this flat Burbank accent, even though, I'm from the South, really.
Is that also where your first love of television came from?
Yeah, and I think I've done some analysis on it because I go to a lot of meetings and I have to kind of figure out where you're from and how it kind of contributed to who you are now. And I think that when you're a kid growing up in a on bases where every year or two either you're moving or your friend is moving, the only constant is flux. And so the thing that stayed the same no matter where we went were those television shows. And I think specifically the families on the television shows, the Seavers and the Huxtables. And so I think, that sense of belonging and stability, that is something that I kind of, I think I never forgot, and then, wanted to be a part of, down the line.
That's really interesting. Did you watch TV with your family, or did you watch it kind of more alone?
I think I watched TV alone, a lot of alone television. And that's, that was like the first 18 years of my life was a lot of Saturday nights and Friday nights, and I guess every night watching a lot of TV alone.
That's interesting because I grew up with TV. I watched a ton of TV as a kid, but it was like our family gathering every night. So it's like we would, get home from school, mom would make dinner, dad would get home from work, we'd eat dinner, and then at 8:00 sharp, like mom would go on the couch, dad would go in the chair, TV would go on, and we would watch like 2 or 3 hours of like primetime television. Monday through Friday.
Were you guys loyal to a network? Did you have a network that
No, my mom would, she would watch a lot of stuff. Like she watched, Friday nights was ABC, TGIF.
Yeah.
Thursday nights was NBC.
Right.
With like Seinfeld, even before that, I think. And then she watched like Roseanne. We watched a lot, like, it was mostly comedies, if I remember correctly. So like Murphy Brown and like all the shows that they're like rebooting now, basically, like those are the shows that like I watched with my family. And I just remember that was like, to me, like I felt that was like one of the ways that my family came together, and like one of the things that brought us closer. So I was interesting that's something that you did.
Yeah, I think for me, my memories of the only that would be, I definitely watched all those comedies and all those dramas, but I did it always by myself. But the thing we did watch together often would be the Today Show in the morning, and then we would watch often the first 25 minutes of Leno at night. I do remember doing that as a more of a group.
That's late for a kid.
Yeah, I know. I watched I logged a lot of hours of television. Yeah.
So how did you end up in LA? And did you go to college?
I went to college. I went to a small liberal arts school called Trinity University in San Antonio. And after I more than anything in the world wanted to go to film school, USC film school or bust. I worked my ass off in college, and everything was about the application to USC and then also NYU and UCLA. And I thought for sure, given how much I've poured into this, that'll be my destiny. And it just didn't work out that way. I was rejected.
For grad school?
Grad school.
Okay.
So yeah, for USC School of Cinema Television. And I was rejected by all the film schools I applied to. And
why do you think?
Yeah, I don't know. You'd have to ask USC and NYU and UCLA. I think it helps to know somebody, and I think it helps to have, I was very academic. I thought, okay, if I get really good grades and I write good essays and my GRE scores are strong, therefore I will. And I think for USC and certainly I think NYU is they want to see more artistic accomplishment, I think, and I suspect. I mean, I'm speculating because I don't know, but the vibe I get since then is I think for USC you should know somebody. For NYU, I should have been doing films and had a whole thing of submit rather than write essays about the films I was going to make. I think it would have helped me a lot to just be able to show them the short films I had shot, which I had not done. So, and at UCLA, I have no idea, but I didn't get in, and so but hilariously, USC had this scam going, which I don't know if they still have, but this, when you got rejected by the film school, you were immediately put on a list to come to the USC summer television program or something like that, and they would invite you to apply, and so I applied, and they instantly accept you. Although I didn't realize that it was this is like, the early days of the internet. So I didn't realize that there was a thing that called automatic response or whatever that you could just get in by applying. And
and this was like their way of just like getting tuition from people that they weren't going to let go to their school. Just go to the summer program.
Yeah, come spend $9,000 for 5 weeks of USC light. And and I think because the rejection was still so raw, because I had put so many years into thinking that it was all going to be USC or bust, that the second that thing was in acceptance, I was totally down no matter what. And it was a boondoggle, I will say, but that doing that summer program at USC introduced me to one of their professors, who was a talent manager, film development executive, and I ended up interning for him after the program was over, and that was sort of the first baby step I got in the industry that kind of led to all the breaks, much further down the line.
And what were you doing as the intern for What was the company that he had?
So the company was called A Management, which is no longer in existence. And that was also in a time which I believe is now illegal in California, where you could do a fully unpaid, full-time internship. And so I was working for like 3 months, I think it was, 40 hours a week unpaid, which is crazy. But at the same time, it was the only way I could get in the door anywhere.
Yeah.
And by being there, I learned a ton because I was working at a talent management company during pilot season, so I learned about how casting works and how submitting actors works. And one of the guys there, like I said, was he was into feature development, so that was my first exposure to screenwriters and how the writing process works and reading scripts that were actually not just getting produced, but then also actually actively getting developed. So seeing what paid writers, what their writing was looking like, and seeing how far apart it was from where I was at the time. And then lastly, there was a manager there named Charlton Blackburn who he was both incredibly brilliant, but also incredibly supportive. And so nearing the end of that internship, he made me do a resume with him, and he made me do probably 6 drafts of my resume. And by the 6th one, that was the one that I started getting actual interviews for paying jobs based off of. And so I don't know how long it would have taken had I not, spent that 3 months working unpaid at that internship, to actually get a paying job, but because it was a great springboard.
And what was your first paying job?
So the first paying job I had was working for a literary manager, who had excellent taste, and had a terrific stable of writers. But he also was a very, very difficult guy. And I found out that the only reason why I got the job with basically no experience other than this unpaid internship was that nobody else either wanted the job or would last more than a week or something. But when I got the job, I basically was like, this is my chance to work in Hollywood and actually make any kind of paycheck. So there's no way he's getting rid of me. And so I hung in there for a year and a half, and that's where I also I met Joe Chandler.
So you guys, the guy that you worked for.
Yeah.
Do you want to say his name?
Yeah, his name's Jeff Field. I can tell Jeff nobody has trained me better for the business than Jeff did. So as tough as he was. It was the best and having survived a year and a half with him, I think prepared me to deal with anything.
Yeah. Is he still in the business?
He is. Yeah.
So Jeff was renting an office from the company that Joe worked for, right? Rigberg
That's
Rugolo
right.
Entertainment.
That's right.
So you didn't actually work at Rigberg Rugolo. You just shared an office, basically.
What happened was, so Joe and I met when I was an assistant, and he was we were assistants at 2 different companies, and then when my time with Jeff was up and I gave my notice, he was leaving the offices. He was vacating his office there. And so when the people at Rigberg Rugolo found out that Jeff was leaving and I was going to leave Jeff, they invited me just to stay there to help be their kind of TV feature development executive. They knew I had literary aspirations, and they were basically saying, hey, instead of being some asshole writing in a Starbucks, trying to get your next job, and then going to be an assistant somewhere else and somewhere else after that, why don't you come be an executive with our company? And so that's what I did for the next 2 years.
So this is actually, the way you put it is just, it sounds so nice and very professional. The way that Joe always tells the story is a little bit different. It's something that I've certainly referenced in the past because what basically happened is that you were working for this guy that was difficult, and was like probably hazing you and maybe yelling at you or whatever.
And they were projectiles as well.
Things getting thrown at you. Yeah. And then he left, you took over his office, and you were like, when you went from answering his phones at the desk to like sitting at his desk, like doing business for the company.
That's right. But I would say, the other also the part I also left out was that for the next 2 years, I was miserable. I always felt like a used car salesman because the both for 2 reasons. One is because I was not meant to be I really think in my heart I was not meant to be a TV literary manager, development executive. That was never why I came out here. I really wanted to write. That was all it was about, was writing. And I had made a choice out of cowardice. Like I fell for it when he said, rather than be some asshole in a Starbucks, I should have said, I'd be proud to be that asshole. That's the best way to eventually get where I want to be. Instead, I thought, okay, yeah, you're right. I was afraid. So I took the easy road. And so I felt like a used car salesman because I was pitching, I was there to service other people's projects, specifically a lot of actors, TV actors who had big feature ideas or TV development ideas. And so I was constantly trying to sell things that frankly I didn't believe in. And it actually made me almost quit entertainment. And in fact, I was ready to. I had lost tell you a little story is my wife caught me getting law school applications and really gave me what for. And everything kind of came to a head one night when we were watching The Shield on DVD, which was a seminal show for me.
Yeah.
And this is back when there were DVDs. And one of the things that happened on a DVD was you could watch special features. And one of the special features on The Shield was they did an Inside the Writer's Room thing. And so in the writer's room, you had all these great writers like, Sean Ryan and Kurt Sutter and Glenn Mazzara. And they were arguing tooth and nail about just, dumb minutia about something about Vic Mackey. And I turned to my wife and I was like, one day that's what I'm going to do. And she said, well, what the fuck have you done about it? Nothing. And she said, you haven't written in 3 years. And we had a huge fight. And of course she was 100% right. But the story culminated with the next day I walked into the boss office and quit just straight out.
Wow. I like your wife.
Yeah, she's great. And lo and behold, I was one of those assholes writing in the Starbucks. But I was never happier. That was the biggest secret for me was that I was just as happy the day that I quit and started actually writing. When I woke up and thought, I'm a writer. Whether or not anybody's going to pay me or will ever pay me, I'm writing today. And the thing that I found is that I was just as happy that day and for the next 9 months that it took to land somewhere, in terms of a writing job. I was never any happier than I was the first day when I started doing that for real.
Was it ever hard for you to tell people that you were a writer before you actually were getting paid to write? Because I struggle with that too. Because when I was doing like performing and creative stuff, I never wanted to tell. I'm not an actor. I'll do plays or I'll like be in sketches or I'll do videos, but I'm not an actor. I'm just, I'm just for fun. But like, I never had like the balls, I guess, to be like, yes, I'm an actor. Like, did you have a similar experience telling people you were a writer?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Because you give up the lie when you because people will shun you, I think, and you certainly think that they will, but I actually do think that they will. They'll never take you seriously again in the fraud career that I was working in, which was, I was a total fraud the whole time. I was a literary manager and development executive or whatever my bullshit title was. And I think to tell people I wanted to be a writer, only just the truth of what was going on would come out, and it was too hard. And they would I suspected that they would treat me the way that I've seen them treat other people, which is they're like, okay, well, you're basically a walking corpse. Like in 4 years, you will not be at your job. There's no point in developing deep relationships with you. I'm certainly not going to do something new with you. And that's exactly what I should have been. I needed to burn the bridges to places that I didn't want to be.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So you quit this literary manager job. You're the asshole writing at the Starbucks. How did you go about finding work? Like, how are you going to get paid for doing this now?
So it was an interesting lesson for me because I had in my mind, there were a lot of people that when I worked in literary management, I had always known that one day, or at least hoped that one day I would finally get the balls to hit the eject button and get out of there. And so all the way up to that, I was subtly cultivating various relationships that I thought, okay, I'm going to get really tight with this literary agent at this, mid-level agency, and I'll get really close with this TV person, and I tried to really nurture these relationships so that and do a lot of favors for people, frankly, so that when I was out in the wilderness, these are people that would hopefully, throw me a bone. And what I found was that there was no correlation between who I had helped or who I had done anything for and who helped me. So what I did was, after I left working for Rigberg, I carpet bombed everybody in my Rolodex. Any writer, agent, manager, executive, producer, whatever it was, I just emailed everybody and said, hey, I'm going to be a writer. If I was a fan of yours, and I would always be a little bit specific to each person about what I admired or appreciated about what they did. And I would just say, I would love to take you out to coffee or whatever. And I would say out of that, probably maybe 25% of the people responded, and they were like I said, people I would have thought definitely that guy's he's gonna sign me as a client. Like, oh, I'd never heard from that person.
You did a lot for him when
Yeah.
you were able to.
And those are the people I never heard from again.
Oh,
Versus there was a woman named Marjorie David who at the time was running a show on ABC Family called I've forgotten what it was. But she was really a working showrunner who had a show on the air and just an incredibly accomplished writer, and she still is and still doing great, Marjorie David. And somebody I did not know barely from Adam. I think I had one brush with her at a social coffee or something. And she, when I emailed her, she didn't even ask who I was. Like, hey, yeah, come on, meet me for breakfast and we'll talk. And I went down to Venice where she lived and had to reintroduce, tell her who I was. She had no idea. She just knew I was somebody who was struggling, and so she wanted to meet me. And at the end of the breakfast, she was like, I don't have anything. I don't know anybody who is, but give me your resume and I promise I'll keep you in mind. And so I kind of forgot about it. And then lo and behold, 2 months later, she joined a show on NBC, and she's like, hey, part of my deal is I get an assistant. If you want it, come work for us. And that's what I did. And that's how I kind of had my first break into television on the writing side, even though I was an assistant.
Were you the writer's assistant, or were you like her executive assistant? Like, was it different than when you were assisting Jeff, the manager?
Well, it was actually, yeah, I was not the writer's assistant, so I wasn't in the writer's room. It was kind of the best thing that could have happened to me, in that I worked for 3 co-EPs on the show, co-executive producers on the show, who shared me. So they were Glenn Mazzara, who, by the way, was one of the writers who was in that DVD extra that kind of launched my whole...
Oh, your hero.
My inciting incident as a writer. So he was the guy who called me on the phone the first day. And so I worked for Glenn. I worked for a guy named Jonathan Shapiro, who's another incredibly accomplished showrunner, and Marjorie. So and because none of them were the showrunner, they were all like the number 2, 3, and 4, or the number 2, whatever you want to describe them. They had a ton of time on their hands, and so they weren't. And the showrunner at the time, this guy Rand Ravitch, a brilliant writer, but he was the kind of guy who does all the work himself. So they were just hanging out a lot of the time, and so I just got all this. I got all this FaceTime with them, and I wasn't having to I'd have to get them coffee or whatever, that kind of thing, collate their scripts. But a lot of it was just me talking to them and picking their brains about writing, and them reading they all read my scripts. They all gave me thoughts. They all passed my stuff along to their agents. I mean, it was just an awesome mentorship that happened.
What was the show?
It was called Life.
Life.
Yeah,
on NBC.
It went for 2 years on NBC.
Great.
A long time ago.
And were you their assistant for 2 years?
No. So what happened was I got the job in June, and then and just the timeline of so I quit my job for Glenn Rigberg in August, and then I write like mad for say 6 months or 7 months, and I started sending my scripts around, and these producers had gotten interested in it, and all that was happening in the background. So then I started working on the show Life in June. And by July, one of the pilot scripts that I had written had started to get a little bit of steam, and that I had real producers attached, and they were sending it to agencies for packaging. And so then I got an agent a month into being an assistant on that show. And then a month after that, I started going to staffing meetings as a writer. And so I was only an assistant to them for 3 months.
Oh, wow.
But they gave me, incredible support, because I was my very first day there. I remember I said, hey, I'm the worst person ever. I'm the worst assistant ever. You can tell me to go fuck myself, but I got a meeting with an agent today, my first day on the job. And I was like, this is something in 5 years in the making. I totally get, and Glenn Mazzara called me into his office. He's like, we need to talk. And he said, because I said I was going to cancel the meeting, and he said, if you aren't going to go to that meeting and get yourself a writing career, then what the fuck are you doing here? He's like, that is why you're here. And that level of encouragement and genuine, sincere, just support and kindness, really was pivotal, because I think it could have just as easily, probably more likely happened that it would have been the opposite conversation when I got called in, and then who knows what would have happened.
Yeah, there's plenty of people in this town that
Yeah.
their assistant shows up first day and has an interview somewhere else, or
Yeah.
a meeting, whatever. They'd be like, "Oh well, you're fucking fired."
Yeah.
That's really cool that he
Yeah.
was nice enough to do that. Let me back up a little bit, because when you became the asshole at Starbucks that was writing every day, had you taken a lot of writing classes? Had you read books? Had you been how did you learn to write? Or what education or training did you have just to be a writer?
Well, I was an English and Spanish lit major in college, so I was already, in terms of just trying to digest a lot of literary material in terms of books and stuff like that. I had a language background. That wasn't a screenwriting background. But then I also am, I just always been a junkie for screenwriting manuals and books, like the Robert McKee stuff, or the Blake Snyder Save the Cat stuff. And so I've always been kind of fascinated by all of those things. But I would say the quintessential moment for me of my development was my first day working for Jeff Field, that really tough manager that I mentioned. He said, by Monday morning, I want you to have read every piece of material of my writers. And so as I started reading that material, I got knots in my stomach just from the first 2 scripts, because I realized how much better these scripts were than anything I'd ever even touched with my own writing. And it was the first time I realized how much I didn't know about what I didn't know. And then the second part of that is that, because at the time I also really wanted to be a movie writer. That was why I originally, came out to do. And so I saved all his TV people for very last. And so the very, very last script that I read was by a writer I'd never heard of on a show I'd never heard of. And it was by far the best piece of writing out of an excellent stack. And I can remember where I was when I read it. And I said, when I read it, holy shit, out loud, because it was so stunning. And it was by a guy named Kurt Sutter, who was a story editor on The Shield. And so I think immersing myself in that material was the first big step to me starting to realize, whoa, I'm way off. And then I went back and started rereading this stuff to go, what are they doing? Like when I'm moved by something or when I'm hit by a twist, really trying to break down, how did they get me there as a reader? What did they actually put in front of me to confuse me or to move me? And so I think I was just started trying to copy as many of those techniques, or at least absorb them, so that I could kind of find whatever my own voice would be, an amalgam of all of these different things. I think that was the main thing.
That's cool. Yeah, I think Stephen King has some quote that's like, to be a good writer, you have to read a lot, or it's something like that, but it sounds like the same thing. And, for scripts too. Yeah.
And I think you have to love it. That's the other thing. I think when I meet a lot of writers, specifically for writers, is I feel like a lot of people that I meet, they want to be drama writers. I don't know comedy, so I don't have these stories as much, but they want to be drama writers. But when I ask them, like, what do you love? They only say movies, or they only say comedies, or they say books. And I'm like, but that's why you're never, I don't think, gonna reach, if you don't love the medium itself and love things happening in the medium, it'll be really hard to hit the highest marks, because you're not steeped in it enough.
Yeah. So you say you were an assistant for 3 months on Life, and then did you book something? Is that what happened?
Yeah. So while I was on, and another thing happened when I was an assistant on Life, which is I got into the NBC. NBC has a diversity program for television writing called Writers on the Verge, and so I got into that program, which was another godsend for me, and both creatively and also from a business standpoint, because they really put me in place to go into staffing meetings, and they incentivized shows to hire me, because the way that program worked at the time, I'm not 100% sure how it does now, but they would pay for me for the first 3 years in essence. So I was free to the shows if they wanted to hire me.
Now, is their effort, across their companies and across their brand to get some diversity in the behind the scenes in the writer's room by hiring, people of color, or, people, immigrants and that kind of stuff?
Yeah,
right?
exactly. And I was lucky though, because there was a woman named Erica Canera who was running it and who's now a comedy executive at ABC, but I ended up booking this show called Burn Notice, which was actually a USA show, network, but Fox was the studio. So usually that would be a problem for the NBC writers program, because they would only put people on the NBC Universal studio stuff. So Erica got the NBC program to pay for me, even though I was on a Fox studio show because of the USA connection. So it's very corporate-ese, but it was a big deal that she really went to bat for me to get them to pay. She got them to break a lot of their own rules.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So you got your first writing gig on Burn Notice.
That's right.
And what was your position or your title there?
I started at staff writer, and after 3 weeks on the job, we went on strike, the Writers Guild. So that my first Writers Guild meeting was, we have decided to strike, the confirmation of the strike vote.
How was that for you? It's like you got all this momentum and steam. You're like, my first job, and then like.
Well, the good thing for me was I was already prepared to go without getting paid because I had a lot of training for that. But at that point, I did feel like, in a weird way, it really helped me because I got on that show, and then the show I was on, Burn Notice, was a spy show. So I thought, okay, I'm going to use all this time to be the best writer of spy stuff on the staff. Like, I'm just going to research. I don't know if my actual writing will be good. I don't know if I'm going to hit the voice of the show. But I'm going to come in with a ton of ideas because I'm just going to do a ton of research over the strike to be ready. And so it actually probably helped me in the long term as much as financially it hurt in the short term.
What year was that again?
The writer's strike was in 2000, and I want to say it started in 2007 and it went into 2008.
Right.
Yeah.
So you were on strike, you were researching, and then when they came back, were you guys just like back in production? Just started writing again?
We were, and then we had a really condensed. We weren't actually in production. We ate our writer prep, so we ended up having to just really go, 100 miles an hour for the rest of the year to catch up and to stay ahead of production.
How did your wife feel once you booked that first writer's job, since she was the one that kind of like kicked your ass into gear?
She was great. The funny thing was when because I had gone to a staffing meeting on a different show right before Burn Notice, and I showed at the time back then they would send you DVDs of the show, especially if they hadn't aired yet or whatever. And she watched it and she was like, "Oh, this would be good for you to have a start in the business." You know what I mean? Like, not to say it's a great show or whatever. And when I showed her the first few episodes of Burn Notice, she said, "Don't fuck this up." So I knew that she definiting approved of that show. And
I really like your wife.
No, she's great, and so she was very, and she's always been, very. Being a TV writer, you have periods when you're in production where you can be a ghost. You know what I mean? Because there's so much, and you're very just a pain in the ass to be around because you're feeling all that pressure of the studio saying we need a script, and the line producer saying this is unproducible, and the actor saying your script sucks, and you just want it to be good, and you're feeling all this pressure, and so it doesn't usually make for somebody who's really a delight to be around. And so she's just always really not held it against me. And then it's happened twice too. One time where, just to talk about when you can't believe the situation you find yourself in. At least I couldn't. Where I had I would take months to write scripts. When I was writing for myself, and because of a few things that happened, the network blew up my first script. My very first script that I had to write professionally, I started it on a Friday, and I had to be on a plane on Sunday night. And so that was like it would be the fastest I had ever written by a factor of 8 or something, and it had to be good. And I remember that Saturday just basically having a panic attack where I was just lying on the floor like, I can't do that. I'm frozen. I have nothing. And I remember her saying, if you're gonna fail, just fail in your chair at least. Don't fail on the ground with your eyes closed. And,
Can I have your wife on this podcast next? She sounds pretty great.
Yeah, I don't know where I would have. I would definitely have washed out by now had it not been for
her. What about that first script? Like you've everything you've done to this point has been on your own, kind of like, in a vacuum. You're probably getting feedback from people, but then you're like, show up to a professional show with a group of professional writers that have all been doing this for years and years, and they're like, "All right, Rashad, here you go. Here's the." Well, I mean, you tell me, please. Like, what is they give you like an outline, and they give you like what the writers' room is kind of broke in story wise, and it's like, "All right, there you go. Like 60 pages due by Monday." Yeah,
it was it's a little more. It was a little more. What's the word? I had a shorter leash than that. So basically, the way it worked was we knew So we kind of plotted out the season arc for the second season of that show, which is when I joined it. So it was 16 episodes, and we kind of said, okay, episode 1 is basically going to be this. Episode 2, he's going to find himself in this situation. Episode 3 is where we get our first big setback. Episode 4, there's a twist. Episode 5, he meets the bad guy. So I kind of had about that much information. To the first thing I had to do was I had to kind of shepherd the break of the story, or at least be the person accountable for the break of the story. So I had to bring that. Okay, so I had to kind of think about what I thought could be the episode, and I bring it into the writer's room. And so I'm the staff writer, bringing it in with a bunch of 10 very senior, more talented writers. And within 2 seconds, they've blown up every single thing I came up with, right? And so I remember just like wanting to vomit on the floor. I was like, I'm fired. But I didn't realize that's the process of most good rooms tend to tear things up, because most things you do off the bat aren't that good. And so what you do is we spent like 5 days breaking the story, and then I knew what all the beats were. I knew all the story beats that I had to go and outline, and then I went and wrote an outline for it. And then that got pretty much decimated by my boss. He rewrote most of it, or told me to throw out most of it. And then we did the same process on the script. And then I had a script. Everybody was proud of it. We were like maybe 3 weeks ahead of the schedule. And then the network threw out my script. And then my boss got busy on something else.
Because they didn't like it, or because
they didn't? Yeah, they felt that it wasn't the right vibe of the show. It was a big departure tonally for the show. And I think that and it is particularly coming from a staff writer, and they had a show that was still very fragile, and they didn't want to alienate the core base with a kind of curveball episode before the show had really landed. So I think, frankly, that they were right in retrospect, in the long view, but it was devastating at the time.
Was it the writing that you had done, or because of the story choices that the room had made? And
yeah, I think it was the story choices that the room had made, and I had pitched, but it was set in the hip hop world, so it had a ton of hip hop influence on a show that there was never any music reference, and suddenly 3/4 of the characters are literally music in the music industry, in the rap industry. And so it just felt like a very different flavor for the show. And so anyway, so we all got sideswiped by it. And it wasn't, and I don't think that they were even saying we don't like the script necessarily. I think they were just saying people aren't going to know that this is the same show, and
right.
It's too early in the show's run to be doing such a departure. This was like 11 years ago, so I don't know what the real reason was, but the end result of it meant I had to write a script over a weekend. Yeah,
but you delivered that script.
Yeah, we delivered, and my boss, Matt Nix, he certainly wrote probably. I mean, I would love to say that I wrote 50% of it. He probably wrote 90% of it, if I'm being, but I delivered it. You know what I mean? Like he always has the option to rewrite me or to change it or whatever, but I gave him something that, that A, I could stand behind, that B, I think he could, even if he rewrote something, which he did amply, but he wasn't going, this was terrible. He was just saying, okay, I see what you did, but I think I can make this better.
Right. And how long did you end up staying on Burn Notice?
I was on Burn Notice for 6 years. So from season 2 to 7.
Wow.
And then the show ended. So I was there from the second season to the end.
So you enjoyed that gig?
Yeah, I did. I think, I definitely enjoyed it. And definitely now, and still, because at the time I had worked on shows that I worked on that, it was a hit. I worked on a show called White Collar that was a hit in the midst of, like, simultaneously while working on Burn Notice. So I had this experience of things I work on are successful. That's great. And, 5 or 6 years out, I have never worked on another show that really resonated with the public in any way since. And so in terms of ratings. And so now I really deeply, there are a lot of things I didn't appreciate at the time when I was on Burn Notice. I think you get bored by the success, and you get bored by everybody going, okay, so it's season 5 of what will easily be a 7-season show or 8-season show. What does it really matter what we do in episode 4 of season 5? That kind of complacency was a part of it, just I think because of human nature. And now I don't think I would have that, because now I didn't know then how rare it was to be in that situation, to be in a successful show.
That's interesting. And what was your title when you left Burn Notice?
So I started at staff writer and I finished at co-executive producer.
Nice.
Yeah.
And then what happened? What happened after that?
So then after that, I kind of went into the great wide open, and I ended up on it because I worked on a spy show for so long. It kind of led me to working on another spy show that was on NBC called Allegiance, and the show was short lived, and I loved working on it, and I really love the creator, a guy named George Nolfi, and another writer that I got to know on the staff, this guy John Glenn, and just because George Nolfi had never really worked in he's really a feature writer director. He had never been in a writer's room before, and so by this funny fluke, I had the most experience of anybody that they had hired. And so the three of us, John Glenn, who had a deal at the studio, George and me, became this sort of three-headed showrunner. And that led me to getting a deal at Universal. And so then I was at Universal for 2 years. And then that led me I left Universal and have now been at 20th Century Fox for the last 2 years.
With an overall deal.
That's right.
Explain that to me a little bit. So, like, what does that mean? You know, maybe a lot of people that are listening to this won't know, but like, you're a writer and a studio or a network comes to you and says, "We want to give you an overall deal." What does that mean exactly? What do they give you for that?
Well, so the overall, and it's given to you usually by the studios. It can be networks, but it's almost always the studios. And so basically what they do is they say, you know, usually it's in a 2-year deal term. Sometimes it's 1, and sometimes it can be 3 or 5. But they say, okay, we're going to pay you X amount over a 2-year period, and you'll get a weekly check. So you'll always, for that 2 years, you will have absolute job security. You'll know where your next check is coming from. And then in exchange for that, anything you write, we own. And we can tell you if you come up with an idea that you're passionate about, but we don't think we can sell to our home network, it's dead on arrival. So we will have
you can't take it out anywhere else.
You can't take it anywhere else because we are your sole employer for this, you know, for the time period that you've signed on to. And then they also have the right to say, okay, well, we want you to work on this or that show. And hopefully you like it, because if we really want you to work on it, you're working on it. And often they'll say, hey, and it hasn't been the case on my 20th deal where I've been working in a you know, really healthy and well-run environment. But often they'll also say, okay, this show is troubled, or this personality is troubled. We need you to go into a troubled situation and help rectify it, or at least help bail water. So it doesn't tend to usually be, they don't usually use those people for the cushy gigs. They use you for the more challenging ones. So that's, I think, the trade-off of what you get for that, the 2 years of stability.
So when you were your first 2 years, you said at NBC?
Yeah, NBC Universal.
NBC Universal. Yeah. Were you developing scripts and pitching shows, and did anything go anywhere during that deal?
Well, no. Well, I sold projects. I sold one to NBC. I sold a pilot to CBS. Neither of them were ever made. The CBS one went very close and got, you know, it felt like it was going to happen, but it never did. So I would basically spend, 9 months out of the year working on a staff, and then the last 3 months of the year trying to get a pilot, developing a pilot for one of the networks, and then waiting for my call in the winter to pass.
And then how long have you been at Fox?
I've been at
20th,
right? Yeah, 20th Century. Yeah, now that they're separating, it's even more confusing. But I've been there for just about 2 years, a little under 2 years.
And are you nearing the end of?
So my deal term, I'm on a 2-year deal with the 3rd-year option. So let's say they didn't pick up the option, it would end in the end of May of 2019.
Gotcha. So let's talk just about the job of, I guess, writing. And you do all dramas. You've never written for a comedy. So unlike Joe, which is one of the reasons I was excited to have you on, is because Joe's done all comedy. You've done all drama. Just what's like maybe just give me like a little overview of kind of like what the job entails, or what the process of pitching an idea to seeing it on television, just like kind of what the day-to-day of being a writer for drama is.
Sure. So and a little bit of it depends on what your level of a writer is, in terms of the bottom of the writing staff is the staff writer. Tends to be the most junior writer, and then the top of the staff, usually the staff being between 7 to 10 people, the top of the staff would be the showrunner, the executive producer. So if you are, if you let's just say you're a staff writer, to give people who don't know an idea. So you would come into, generally what happens in a drama is there's a writer's room. And for the first 3 weeks of your job, you guys would be talking about the big season, not necessarily the individual episodes, but the big season. What's going to happen this year? Are they going to fall in bed together? Are they going to catch the spy? Are they going to, all that kind of stuff? And so you come together and you create the big arc, and then you start chopping that arc into, okay, so we think episode 1 and 2 are about these things, and 3 and 4 about these things. And then, so once you have that, you go, okay, so now for this week, we're going to break episode 1. And so the whole staff will be in a room usually. The showrunner is usually leading the break of the episode, or whoever they have running the writer's room. And you just go act by act, scene by scene, and break out the story. And that usually takes about a week to break an episode. Some shows much more, and some shows much less. And then after that, you just do another episode, and you keep breaking the episodes until it's your episode that you're going to write. And usually the showrunner will say, hey, staff writer, you're going to be writing episode 6 or 5. And so you'll sit and help break those episodes leading up to yours. And then when your episode gets broken in the room, you will take that the beat sheet that's been put together by the room, and you will flesh it out into what will often be about a 12-page outline, a prose document that just sort of tells the network and studio, okay, scene 1 is this, scene 2 is this, scene 3 is this, and it gives you a sense of the character dynamics and the flow of the story, and it also tells production, okay, look, in this episode we're going to need a warehouse, and we're going to need a sports stadium, and we're going to be on the stages, our stages being our standing sets that we own. We're going to probably be there for 5 out of our 8 shoot days, or they can start to really evaluate the logistics of the episode. And once that outline gets approved, then you turn it into a script, and you just basically are putting dialogue into those story movements that you've already come up with. And at every step, you get a ton of notes, and you revise and you revise. But that's the and then you go to production, and I'll just finish, I guess. You go to, so you'll once your episode starts prepping, if it's a drama, it will usually be about an 8-day prep, where you are driving around in a van and you're picking your locations, and you're meeting your wardrobe people to tell them sort of what your villain should wear and what kind of clothes, and
you're participating as the writer in all of that for your episode.
Yep, on the show, on most of the shows I've been on, not all of them. Some of them have a person from production, a directing producer maybe, who's making those calls. But all the shows I've been on, the writer has a really strong voice with the director to be able to say, hey, I really think this villain is high end, so don't put him in shorts or whatever. And you're also talking about their vehicles, and you're talking about the props and all that stuff. So that's about 8 days. And during that time, you're doing studio and network notes, and you'll definitely have your line producer come in and say, this episode is undoable. We need to cut $200,000 from the budget, or you need to change 4 of these locations to our standing sets. You wanted to shoot at the waterfront? Nope, it's in the guy's living room, so we can be here. And that process happens for 8 days, and then you're in production for 8 days on the dramas I've been on, and then you go into post for about 2 weeks.
And you out on set for your episodes as well? Are you there shooting the show? On
half the shows I've been on. The other half you didn't. But I think it tends to work best as unappealing as it is to me personally, who doesn't love being on set and being on location in some other city for 3 weeks. It tends to connect you to the material a lot deeper when you're there, and you can talk to the actors or argue with the actors or debate the actors, whatever. It really sharpens your story, like your sense of the story, to be there, and it makes it really clear and present.
Mm-hmm. And then once it's shot, it goes into post, and there's obviously editors.
Yep.
And the director is still overseeing the cut of the episode, but how much involvement do you have in post?
So basically, the way it works is the editor would have, I think it's usually 4 to 5 days to do what's called the editor's assembly, where they are putting the footage together with music, and it's a rough draft of the episode. But they have to do so much work to get it in place, and or whose coverage are you on for various scenes, all that kind of stuff. Then the director comes in, and they have 5 days with the cut. And then unless they're the directing producer of the show, at that point they're done. They go off and direct some other episode of something else or whatever. And at that point, it is now in the writer-producer's hands. And then you have it the rest of the way. So then we producers will have, say, 4 or 5 days with the cut. And then we turn into the studio. script and they give us notes, and then we turn to the network, then they give us notes, and then we move on to the next episode.
It sounds really fun.
Yeah, it's great. It's great. It is the best job in the world, but it is a high volume, because if you think about it, when you're in post on that, you're also overseeing, the breaking of an episode that's 6 episodes down the line, and you're overseeing the outline of the episode in front of that, and you're overseeing the script in front of that. So you have to really have good people in place to help you manage the sheer volume of material that you're in charge of managing. But yeah, every step of the process I think is great. I mean, I love all of it.
And it's something that I've always loved about television versus film, is that you're getting to do all these things in these sort of compressed timelines, and then you're on to something else. So you don't have time to get bored, because it's like, after one episode's done, there's 18 more to write and shoot and produce, and then every year a new season comes along with new stories versus, a feature film that you might spend 2 or 3 years working on the same project. To me, that's always been an appeal of television.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that's great about that is that I've seen that it's often the stuff you do fast that you have to work hard at and deliver on a deadline is often better, because your purest creative instincts, when you don't have time to overthink and you have to, and you're going to have actors performing it, and that it has to be, so it has to be good, but then you don't know how you're going to get there, but it has to be done also. There's something unconscious about that process that I've found that stuff I write in a week or 10 days is often better than stuff I give myself 3 months to work on. And I don't know if it's just the adrenaline of that television, that machine that needs to keep moving. But yeah, I've seen that the material actually tends to be better for some reason than when you can just kind of nurse it for a long time.
Totally. Is there anything you don't like about the job?
There's definitely things I don't like about the job. I would say the hardest part about working in TV, I think, is just when you're in charge of managing the process at a bigger level, and so just the sheer volume of, let's say that you have writers. Okay, that guy's supposed to be, or that gal's supposed to be working on that outline. Well, so and so is supposed to work on the script, and I'm going to be working in the writer's room. And you get in the writer's room and the story sucks, and you don't know the answer to how to fix it, and so you feel trapped. And yet time marches, and so and while you're stuck on that story and all you want to do in the world is solve this story problem, you get a call from your line producer saying, dude, this script you just turned in is totally unmakeable. And then you get a call from your directing producer saying, hey, this bozo you've got on the set directing, he has no clue what he's doing. And then you have the network calling saying, we hate your latest outline. So that's the part, I think, the stress level of feeling like you're constantly, I don't want to use an aggressive metaphor like under attack, but you always feel like at any minute the whole house of cards could come down. And so you just, I obsess about trying to stay ahead of that monster, but you're going to get, it's a contact sport. Like, it's going to hurt at various points.
But those are problems that you are now dealing with because you are show running and working in the senior levels. I mean, it's one of the like dirty little secrets of this industry, and probably any industry really, is that like, the higher up you get, the actually like more stressful it gets, the harder it gets, and everyone's always like vying for those promotions and those high titles, and it's like, well, careful what you wish for, because sometimes like, and maybe you have this, like some of the happiest, easiest, most fun jobs that I had were ones where I was like, like mid-level, lower level. I had a lot of autonomy, or I was, doing something that was fun, and I'd turn it in and like on with my life. But now that it's like a little bit more like macro level, overseeing the whole process and everything, like it can get pretty stressful.
Yeah, and I think for the lower end, the things that were the hardest is when you write a script and you think it's great, and then it gets totally thrown out or rewritten, and you find out maybe it wasn't so great. And I mean, I think on the one hand that's positive because you learn from it, but it's devastating also when your material, when your ideas are not well received, or when you pitch a dud in the room and you can feel it. Like, that part is not pleasant.
Mm-hmm. So what would you recommend to people that are trying to break in and they want to be writers? What's the best way to go about doing that?
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing to me that the thing I tell people first you have to decide what kind of writer you want to be. Like, because I think a lot of people say, I want to be a writer. I don't know if I could write movies or TV or comedy or drama. And I think you can do that eventually, but to break in, you have to be so excellent at one, if you're coming in off a pile of 80 scripts or 100 scripts, it really has to sparkle. And I am a firm believer that the only way to get it to that place is to have just laser focus on doing, a very small circle thing really well. And so the first thing I tell people is identifying yourself, like what are the shows that give you goosebumps? And that's usually a hint of the kind of material you should be writing, that kind of vibe. It's not to say that you should write a show about a meth dealer if you really like Breaking Bad, but it is to say you like somebody in those high intensity kind of situations, and you can recreate or you can emulate the things it did for you, you can do for your reader in a different context. But to start to drill down, okay, that means you're probably a cable writer and a drama writer, or whatever it is. First do that, and so you get some self-knowledge about who you are creatively and what you like. And then secondly, it sounds so dumb, but it's just so true, is then you need to write, and you need to have 3 scripts. You need to have 3 scripts that are good, and you will break through. If you have 3 good scripts, if you have 2 good scripts, you will break through. If you have 3 good scripts, you'll never not work again if you don't want to. But it's hard, and I think a lot of people, they have 3 good ideas, but they don't have 3 good scripts, and so to turn them into something that you've actually written down is the biggest difference.
And when if you're staffing a show, if you're evaluating younger writers, are you looking at their original? Do you want to see original pilot ideas, or do you do spec scripts where they write an episode of an existing show? What type of scripts do you look at for people?
I always ask for both. I ask for one pilot, and if it's somebody who I really want to staff, I should say, if something is just lights out exceptional, then I would hire them off of one thing. The only reason why you might ask for 2 is to make sure that they wrote it. You know what I mean? Because somebody didn't put their name on something. But I think the best world is that you have both, because there are some people who want pilots. There's some people who want specs. I got hired because Matt Nix, the showrunner, only read specs, but the network only read pilots. So I had to have 2 different pieces of material to get me through. And so I think it's good to have both for that exact reason, in case you never know the preference of the showrunner and the network and the studio. And then secondly, I think they show different things. So the pilot shows, can you create a world? Can you pitch really new and original ideas, which is huge in a writer's room? And then the spec shows, can you capture the voice of something, which is also a massive factor in being an effective member of the staff. So I think they're both good.
Right. And then what about just like getting jobs or finding opportunities? Like how to where do those exist? How do people find these rooms to try to break into?
Well, I think one thing is it really does help to live in LA, because you can go to coffee with people, because I think you can reach out to people on social media. And if you, if you're trying to get to Joss Whedon or somebody who's got, hundreds of thousands or millions of followers, it's trickier. But there's a lot of people who are working showrunners or upper level writers who you can easily at any moment send them a direct message to tell them you really loved their episode of something, and you'd love to take them for coffee, or you want to talk about writing. People tend to love to talk about themselves. So if you give them an open invitation to spend 20 minutes to talk about themselves, they'll usually take you up on it.
It's the only way I'm able to have this podcast.
Yeah, here we are. Look at me. And so you can quickly, if you take a list of 10 people you're fans of or shows you're fans of, and then look who the writer producers are on them, and then reach out to them on social media, I bet you'll get a coffee with 2 or 3 of them. And off of that, if you can, meet them and have be a decent human being, you can probably get them to either take your resume or read your script or whatever it is. And writers are always moving from show to show, especially in the this age of streaming when there's so many shows on. They're always going into new rooms looking for new staff to fill the rooms out. And so it's not that hard it's hard, I should say. It's not nearly as impossible as it feels, because especially with social media, you can reach people at a level that you couldn't even 10 years ago. And once you can get somebody to have coffee with you, then it's giving them your resume is the easiest thing in the world. They don't have to read anything if you want to be a PA or a writer's assistant or something like that.
That is such great, solid advice. Yeah. And it's true, and I work in reality, but it's the same thing. Like I've had people email me or direct message me on social media that just like, hey, love the work you're doing on Vanderpump Rules. Like, whatever. And I'm always like so flattered and
Yeah.
like shocked that someone would even know who I am, and my name pops up at the beginning of the episode. So they just did a little research, I guess.
Yeah.
But it's like, it is like, it's so flattering. So it's, it's the same for you guys, right? Like you're working so hard on these episodes, you're not, a lot of writers, most writers are very like low profile, don't have, they're not big and like public or whatever. So, you get like a little note like that. It's like, thanks.
Yeah, totally. And I think the mistake a lot of people make is they think, well, I'm going to look for the celebrity writers. I'll look for the famous ones, like you said, like the Kurt Sutters or Ryan Murphys or somebody, or Shonda Rhimes or somebody. But don't go two cuts under them, because upper level writers who actually do most of the lower level hiring anyway. It's not the famous people who hire the PAs and the writer assistants. It's some person like me who's a co-EP or something. Like we have to do that kind of work. So those are the people you should be reaching out to.
That's awesome. What else do you hope to accomplish in your career? Like, where do you go from here? Do you, are you gonna sell your own show and run your own show? Do you still think about writing a movie? That's why you came out here originally. What else do you have in your career?
So definitely my big wish and big hope is to run a show that I created, and to do something that would be an expression that hopefully only I could have, so that I'm not just jumping onto a cop show or a something show. And I've been guilty of that, of selling shows that, hey, this is a cool premise. And I know how to tell cop shows because I've done it a lot, or I know how to tell spy shows or whatever. But to tell a story that is, uniquely my experience, would be the coolest thing. So I'm writing something right now for Fox that is the closest thing I've ever had in terms of, it's very specific to my background and to my family dynamic. So that's the kind of thing that would be really cool to know, that if I could get something made that I knew that if I dropped dead, the show probably couldn't go on because it's so specific to me. And that would be my dream. And then in terms of, I haven't been as interested in going back to movies, only because I really love television. I when I give that advice to people to say, what do you love? What do you love to watch? For me, it's always TV. I almost never. There's just too many great shows, and so I'm always watching a new show. So I haven't had the itch to go back to movies.
What have been your favorite shows that have come out in the last couple of years?
Well, I love The Crown. I mean, it's probably my favorite show right now. I love The Americans, which just went off the air. I love Always Sunny in Philadelphia, which is a comedy. I just watched that for pure pleasure. Game of Thrones, obviously, is a great show. I watch This Is Us. I think it's brilliant. And it often sweeps me away and moves me and stuff. So I watch so many shows. I watch Narcos. I think that's brilliant.
Do you watch Narcos Mexico,
I
the
just
most
started.
recent one?
Yeah, I'm on episode 2.
Yeah, that's great.
I just started. Yeah, I love it. And so I keep looking. We have Crazy Ex-Girlfriend stacked up on our queue, and Mrs. Maisel season 2 we haven't started. So there's so many great shows that
it's overwhelming. There's
Yeah.
so much good TV to
Yeah.
watch, and especially you have kids. I have kids. It's
Yeah.
like we usually get like one precious hour a day if
Exactly.
we're lucky to watch a show. And I miss the days of. I tell my wife all the time, I'm like, I just miss the days where I'd come home from work, like just like get some takeout, like sit down and like watch like 4 hours of television.
Yeah.
I miss that, but
Yeah, I totally relate to that. But I'd say the upside of it is now I really when we watch something, we are not looking at our phones. We do not take it for granted that hour. So it
It's
makes
a
the
special
bar.
hour.
Yeah, the bar is higher on the shows we watch because we're not going to watch something crappy that we don't love.
yeah.
But Killing Eve, by the way, another great show that I really enjoyed this year. But we it's like it's an event for us now to watch it because it is that hour. It's like, here's our TV hour, so let's really savor it.
Totally. What's the best advice that you've been given in your career by somebody else?
Yeah. So I think I've had 2 pieces of advice that have, one big and one small, and they both have been great for me. The first one is from my manager, Larry Schumann, when I was struggling with, do I take this job or do I try and go for this other job? And his advice to me is always, you have to love what you're writing. You have to lose yourself in it. And that if that reward of it, that release you get when you're writing and you forget what time it is because you're so lost in it, if you don't have that, then there is no career move. There's no equivalent to that. So it's better to be speccing something that makes you lose yourself or work on something for a network that isn't as fancy, but you love what you're doing. It will always pay much greater dividends creatively and ultimately financially than doing something because you think it's the strategic right move or whatever. So that, and not to be, and I've made this mistake many times of getting into situations where I was really concerned about, my title or my position or the circumstances of the executives who were there and worrying about all this bullshit versus worrying about, can I lose myself in that story? And that is the best macro advice. And then the best micro advice I've got, which isn't so micro, but I should say is just specific. It was from Glenn Mazzara, who was my sort of first big mentor as a writer. And he said every meeting in Hollywood generally starts the same with the question or the statement, "Tell me about yourself." And he said, so I had just come from a meeting when he asked me about this. And he said, "Did they say, 'Tell me about yourself'?" I said, "Yes, they did." And he said, "And what did you say?" And I said, "Well, I said that I grew up in the military, but that I went in Texas and I went to college here, and then I wanted to do this." And he goes, "Wrong, fail." And I was like, "What?" He's like, "Well, you gave them facts. They want a story. Everybody wants a story. They want you to tell them about how you were lonely or you were rejected or you were an underdog and you went through some trial and this moment that you made it to LA or this office, this meeting, this is the culmination of that journey." But they want it to be 2 minutes long or 3 minutes long, but they want an emotional story of some kind. And so every time I go into a showrunner meeting or a meeting with a producer or an executive, I try and remind myself of that they want a little arc, and that sticks with them. They don't want facts.
I love that.
Yeah.
That is so smart. We love being told stories.
Yeah.
Like, be it in TV, be it on the internet, or be it in person. That's a really good piece of advice.
Yeah, and the other thing is, when it's specific to, I think, or maybe it's specific to writing and TV, but they often the ultimate evaluation in those meetings when you go for staffing is they're constantly wondering, can you write my show? And if you can tell a story of yourself, or even if you're telling a story about what happened to your dog that morning, if you can subtly hit the vibe of their show, like if it has edge or a surprise or it's funny or whatever it is that show is, that's even if it's subconscious, they're going, "Oh, this person seems like they could do this. They could find a way to do this." And I think that was the beginning of what Glenn was telling me, is that you just always need to be a storyteller as a writer in any environment.
I love that. Well, Rashad, thank you so much, man. This has been incredible. You're such a nice guy.
Oh, please. My pleasure.
You're such a good talker. I love it.
I know, it's great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremiah. I appreciate it. And I want to thank you because I wish I had something like this, those years ago when I was trying to crack it. I think it's so helpful, and to have people who are so accessible, and yourself included, to do this for people is awesome.
Cool. I appreciate that. All right. That was my chat with Rashad Raisani. I really like Rashad. He's such a nice guy, and he's so smart. I thought that his advice for people trying to break in was so good. So if you're listening, take it, because he knows what he's talking about. If you haven't already, please go on to iTunes or Spotify or wherever you're listening and subscribe, rate it, leave a review. It's really going to help build the audience in 2019. I spent some time over the holiday break reaching out to people and sitting down and doing more interviews. So I've got some great guests coming up, some great interviews for you to listen to. I really think you're going to like the direction this podcast is taking. If you want to reach out to me, please do. I would love to hear from you. You can find me on Instagram. It's Working Class Hollywood. I also have an email address for the show. It's show, SHOW, @workingclasshollywood.com. Please send me a note. Let me know what you think. Let me know what I'm doing right, wrong, anything you want to say. I'd love to hear it. Thank you again to everyone that's listening, and I will see you next time.